Hello everyone and welcome. This is still Introduction to Economics and this is the second video in the lecture series on economics and this is still the basics by which we'll be talking about the economic systems. Now if you're new to this channel, consider subscribing and clicking that notification bell so that you'll be notified when we will be uploading videos like this. Now we will be talking about economic systems in this specific videos depending on the different terminologies used, but of course, they are still the same. But before that, we'll be talking about what are different economic indicators. Number one, we have the gross domestic product. The gross domestic product is the total productivity of one particular country domestically. It is the aggregate output of all the labor, the industry, agriculture, and all the things that is produced in a particular country. It is calculated, added together, and it becomes the gross domestic product. Retail sales, this is the outward price or the end price of the goods and services that is produced by industries and in the context of our target customers. So retail sales is talking about the end price of the goods and services. Then we have industrial production, the productivity of the industry in producing goods and services. The consumer price index is the average price that the consumers have to pay in a particular good or service. Then we have the employment data. The employment data actually talks about the employment rate in a particular period of time in a specific given scenario. Now, these are not the only economic indicators. There are a lot of economic indicators, but I'm just talking about here the basics.
Then we have four economic activities. We have consumption, production, exchange, and distribution. Production refers to the process of creating or processing goods and services. Consumption refers to acts of using goods and services. Exchange refers to the action of consumers and producers in making any kind of trade. And distribution, this is the process of how specific goods and services are allocated. Then we have economic systems and its characteristics. Right? Number one is the traditional economic system. This is based on goods and services and work of all which follow certain established trends, relies a lot on people, and there is very little division of labor or specialization. In essence, traditional economy is very basic and most ancient of the four types. Some parts of the world still function as a traditional economic system. It is commonly found in rural settings, second and third world nations, and where economic activities are predominantly farming or traditional income generating activities. There are usually very few resources to share in communities with traditional economic system. Either few resources occur naturally in regions or access to them is restricted in some way, or access to them is restricted in some way. Thus, traditional system, unlike other three, lack of potential to generate a surplus. Nevertheless, precisely because its primitive nature, traditional economic system is highly sustainable. In addition, due to its small output, there is very little wasted compared to other three systems. Now, traditional systems are actually still prevalent in many of the countries in Central Africa, wherein there is no access to modern technology and people rely on hunting and they engage in barter system. In some other places also of the Amazon, the unexplored places of the Amazon, and some other part of Papua New Guinea in Southeast Asia. And these particular places still involves traditional economic systems, and some part of the Philippines in the mountainous area where there is limited access to modern technologies, and they rely on farming and barter exchange. That is an example of traditional economic system. Then we have a command system. This is a dominantly centralized authority, usually the government, that controls significant portion of the economic structure, also known as a planned system. The command economic system is common in communist societies since production decisions are preserved of the government. If an economy enjoys access to many resources, chances are it may lean towards a command economic structure. As such case, a government or the government comes in and exercise control over the resources. Ideally, centralized control over valuable resources such as gold or oil. These or the people regulate other less important sector of the economy such as agriculture. In theory, the command system works very well as long as the central authority exercises control with general population's best interest in mind. However, that rarely seems to be the case. Command economies are rigid compared to other systems. They react slowly to change because power is centralized. That makes them vulnerable to economic crisis, emergencies, as they cannot quickly adjust to changing conditions. Command economic system is prevalent in communist societies such as those places in Cuba and places in like Venezuela and other socialist societies. Another example for that is North Korea and China, right? These are command economic system. If you look at North Korea, almost everything is actually controlled by the government, and there is no honor of private property. They don't care about your private dwellings. The government can confiscate or take your private properties. By the way, in North Korea, there is no such thing as that of a private property because the government practically owns everything. Similar in mainland China, where the government controls almost all of the resources. The government controls the construction, controls almost all of the mining industries. That is the most important resources that is available in China is controlled by the government, including your human rights. You cannot even talk something against the government, otherwise you'll be in jail. That also is true in Cuba under the leadership of Fidel and Raul Castro, and also during the reign of Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. Now, look at what happened to Venezuela and Cuba now. They're suffering because, again, command economy have a hard time adjusting to market conditions. And by the way, that is this kind of economic system is what is being propounded here in our country by the Communist Party of the Philippines. The Communist Party of the Philippines want a command economic system of which the country's resources will be controlled by the government. And then they will just ration people with whatever they need. And that is the principle of, command economy, also adopted in some of the socialist countries. Some of the socialist countries also engage so much on command type economy wherein governments actually control resources. And so if there are socialist propaganda, it more or less inclined into a command economic system, which is probably at some point a terrible idea to adapt here in our country or probably some other else, because it has been proven in the past that those who engage in command economic system almost always fails, but those who engage in some kind of a free economic market, then they actually at some point prosper a lot. Now, this is what I'm talking about, a market economic system. A market economic system are based on the concept of free markets. In other words, there is a very little government interference. The government exercises control over its resources and it does not interfere with important segment of the economy. Instead, regulations come from people and the relationship between supply and demand. The market economic system is mostly theoretical. This is to say that pure market system doesn't really exist. Why? Well, all economic systems are subject to some kind of interference from a central authority. For instance, most governments enact laws that regulate fair trades and monopolies. From a theoretical point of view, a market economy facilitates substantial growth. Arguably, growth is highest under a market economic system. A market economy's greatest downside is that it allows private entities to amass a lot of economic power, particularly those who own resources of great value. The distribution of resources is not equitable because those who succeed economically control most of them. In a market economic system, you are free to own private properties. You can start your own business whenever you want. You can do whatever you want to do as long as it is within the bound of legal requirements. As long as you don't do anything illegal, then you are free to do whatever you want. And though the problem with economic system is that you create very rich individuals. If you notice, the United States of America, an example of a market economic system, actually produces a lot of billionaires, right? And those billionaires actually are hugely rich than any of other persons that are produced in a closed command economy. Next, we have a mixed system. A mixed system is a combined characteristic of market and command economic system. For this reason, mixed systems are also known as a dual system. Sometimes the term is used to describe a market system under strict regulatory control. Many countries in developed Western Hemisphere follow a mixed system. Most of the industries are private, while the rest composed of primarily public services are under control by the government. Mixed systems are the norm globally. Supposedly, a mixed system combines the best features of market and command systems. However, practically speaking, mixed economies face the challenge of finding the right balance between free market and government control. Government tend to exert much effort to control than is necessary. The Philippines is an example of a mixed system because we allow private sector to prosper, but we also have government companies and corporations. We control the natural resources we provide, however, licenses to operate on specific terms. And that is a character of in economic system in the mixed level or in the mixed style or strategy.
All right. Now, the sample of the economic system that I've discussed in this video is also represented in different terms, which I'll be introducing to you in this video. Now, let's start with primitivism. In primitive agrarian societies, people tend to self-produce all of their needs and wants at the level of the household or tribe. Families and tribes would build their own dwellings, grow their own crops, hunt their own game, fashion their own clothes, and bake their own bread. This economic system is defined by very little division of labor and resulting to low productivity and a high degree of vertical integration of production processes within a specific household or village. What goods are produced and a relationship-based reciprocal exchange within and between families or tribes rather than the market transactions. So this is almost always similar to traditional system or traditional economic system. Then we have what they call as the concept of feudalism. Later as civilization developed economies based on Production by social class emerged, such as slavery and feudalism. Slavery is invoked production by enslaved individuals who lacked personal freedom or rights and were treated as a property of their owners. Feudalism was a system where a class of nobility, known as lords, owned all of the lands and leased out small parcels to peasants to farms, with peasants handing over much of their production to the lords. In return, the lords offered the peasants a relative safety and security, including a place to live and the food to eat. So this is the time where there are monarchs, kings, and queens that are owning much of the land, and you just sort of lease these lands to peasants, to farmers. And then farmers will give a certain percentage to their lords or to their king. So that's how feudalism works. But of course, it is almost always a part of history, because at this particular moment in time, feudalism is no longer a prominent aspect or a prominent economic system. But of course, there are still parts of the world that actually embrace the concept of feudalism, although it is no longer the governing economic regime. Now, feudalism still is considered as a traditional economy. Now, we proceed with the concept of capitalism. Capitalism emerged with the advent of industrialization. Capitalism is defined as a system of production whereby business owners, entrepreneurs, or capitalists organize to produce resources, including tools, workers, and raw materials, to produce goods for sale in order to make profit, and not for personal consumption. In capitalism, workers are hired to return for wages. Owners of the land and natural resources are paid rents or royalties for the use of the resources, and the owners of the previously created wealth are paid interest to forego the use of some of their wealth, so that entrepreneurs can borrow and to pay wages and rents and purchase tools for hired workers to use. Now, capitalism in the modern time is actually applied to what we call as the concept of entrepreneurship. Now, entrepreneurs apply their best judgment of the future economic conditions to decide what goods to produce and earn a profit if they decide well, or suffer losses if they judge poorly. This system of market prices, profits, and loss as a selection mechanism as to who will decide how the resources are allocated for production is what defines a capitalist economy. Now, the best example for a capitalist economy is the United States, because everyone is free to start their own business, to compete with anyone, hire their own people, their own employees, and give them salary. So that is an example of a capitalist economic system. Now, in capitalism, these roles, workers, resource owners, capitalists, and entrepreneurs, represents functions in a capitalist economy and not separate or mutually exclusive classes of people. Individuals typically fulfill different roles with respect to their different economic transactions, relationship, organizations, and contracts which they are party to. This may even occur within a single context, such as employee-owned cooperatives, where the workers are also the entrepreneurs or a small business owner, operator, who self-finances his firm out of personal savings and operates out at a home office, thus acts as simultaneously as an entrepreneur, capitalist, landowner, and worker. So in an economic system which uses capitalism, you are given the opportunity to decide for your own and determine your own fate. Now, next is what we call as socialism. Socialism, by the way, capitalism is a free market economy as discussed previously. Now, socialism is a form of a cooperative production economy. Economic socialism is a system of production where there is limited or hybrid private ownership of the means of production, other types of productive property. And a system of practices or a system of prices, profits, and losses is not the sole determinant used to establish who engages in production, what to produce, and how to produce it. Segments of the society band together to share these functions. In socialism, it is the government that determines what specific aspect of the economy have to be prioritized, where people have to work, because at the end of the day, the government is the owner of the merchandise by which everyone at the end of the day will share and reap its fruits. So, meaning socialism is a welfare state strategy wherein everyone will tax higher so that the government can provide social programs that would meet the demands and needs of the people, and in a way make those people become a productive member of the society. So theoretically, this is a utopian kind of an economic system. But of course, many sort of experimentation on the implementation of socialism, but of course, they fail. Now, then we have communism. Communism is a form of a command economy whereby nearly all economic activity is centralized, and through the coordination of state-sponsored central planners, a society's theoretical economic strength can be marshaled to the benefit of the society at large. Executing this in reality is far more difficult than in theory, and it requires no conflicting or competing entities within the society to challenge the allocation of resources. Now, communism is a one notch higher than socialism because in socialism, there are still private properties, and private owners, entrepreneurs can still be involved in an economic transaction with different people, although there is a much strict regulation by the state. Now, communism, being a form of a command economy, as discussed previously, it actually provides a certain rules that is centralized, by which only the leaders of a particular economic unit can provide decisions of which particular strategy to use, what particular aspect of the economy has to be prioritized, and all the decisions with regards to economic development must go through a state-sponsored central planners. So communism is a very dangerous form of economic system because it is highly prone to authoritarian and dictatorial form of government. In fact, many of the authoritarian and dictatorial form of the government that exist today actually uses communism as their economic system, or what you call as a command economy. Now, here is my discussion with this specific video. We have traditional economy, which includes primitivism and feudalism, command economy, which involves with communism and socialism, and then we have market economy, that is capitalism, and of course mixed economy, as displayed in this screen.